All right, got it.
That may change the focus on your on your PowerPoint slides again.
I didn't see any change.
Did
I'm
it
gonna
pop up
try.
and ask
I'm
you
gonna
to
try.
confirm?
Oh,
Yeah, I think when you had to click, I agree, then the focus went to Zoom instead of PowerPoint.
okay.
It wasn't exactly I agree, it was got it.
Yeah, right. I understand that I have no choice.
Right.
Do we want to leave this up for a little while?
Yeah, well, either one. I was thinking that just as we decide to get started, let's start here. Let me quickly go through this, and then I'll turn it over to you to what's the opposite of adjourn? To start the meeting?
Convene.
What is it?
Convene.
Convene. Yes, thank you. To convene the meeting. That's why I keep a thesaurus on my phone.
Not a huge attendance yet, I see.
I hope that's just a lot of people being fashionably late.
Likewise.
We need better donuts.
Scott, good to see you. Paul Goldstein.
Goldstein, what are you want to say something to it? Wait a minute, you're muted. But say something to it. Who is that? Paul said something.
It was Paul Goldstein that said hello to you.
Okay.
Hello,
Good morning, Scott.
hi.
Morning, Dave, Ricky. Helen, how many years has it been?
What was that?
Oliver, KB6PA, how are you doing?
All right, I've got 2 minutes, Grant, so maybe we can start on this slide in 2 minutes.
Oh, you want me to back up? Go to
No, I
the.
think- No, that's fine. I was just saying by my clock, I got 2 minutes.
Right, right.
I'm not looking at the seconds, so I assume it must be less than 2 minutes.
Right, yes.
But it,
3 minutes.
as you say, being fashionably late, we gained six participants in the last 2 minutes.
All right,
Well, and they weren't even fashionably late. They were fashionably early.
yeah.
Okay, now my scroll bar is, I got to scroll to see all the participants.
Hi, this is Phil. The meeting ID number and the password didn't work. It pointed me to a February meeting.
Yeah, I think that was the long link from the based on the second link there. Yeah, that seems to be pointing to the wrong meeting. The shorter bit.ly link. Obviously, you figured that out because you're here.
Yeah.
We're glad you're back from the future.
Well, so I've got 9 o'clock. Grant will officially convene the meeting, but the slide we've got up here is just kind of a couple of procedural things, just to sort of help everybody out, and then we'll let Grant officially start it. So obviously, if you're here, you've figured out the Zoom link. So congratulations, you passed the test. You'll get your license in the mail in the next couple of weeks. So in terms of using the Zoom, similar to last year, a couple of points that we'd like to bring up is, one, you can rename yourself. Obviously, it's not required, but we recommend first name and call sign, but you can name yourself anything that you want. On the computer or phone app, there are multiple ways to do it. Normally, you'd find the participants list, you'd find yourself, and if you hover over your name, you'll see something like a more, or maybe there's a rename choice. It depends on what operating system you're on. So hopefully you can find it that way. Actually, maybe I should have started off with, you can see on our slide here on the top, the bit.ly/ug-zoom-help gets you into Zoom help. So you can poke around there if you want to study Zoom help some more. By default, when you joined this meeting, you were muted. I can see many people have figured out how to unmute themselves, so that's great. You can temporarily unmute yourself with sort of a push to talk kind of thing using the space bar. You do have to have Zoom as your window of focus. If you've changed your focus to your email or something else, you might be multitasking. The PTT button doesn't work. On the phone app, you got to swipe right and there's a tap to speak. If you've used your telephone and you've dialed in, *6 unmutes you. And please remember to mute yourself when you're done making noise, talking or asking your question, wherever the case might be. I do have mute control, so I will mute people with background noise, nothing personal, just trying to maintain the meeting. And just because I've muted you, you can still unmute yourself, so there's nothing permanent about that. You still have full control. When it comes time to vote, we're going to try to use the raise hand feature because it's impossible to figure out who said yay or nay. So the raise hand feature on Windows and Mac, it's the Alt-Y or Option-Y. And on the phone app, if you look for the 3 dots in the lower right, you'll have a raise hand. So when Grant gives you instructions to ask you to raise your hand if you agree or disagree, or if you have a question, or whatever the case might be, please use that feature rather than unmuting and talking. If there's a point that anybody has any questions, you can raise hand or unmute yourself. We'll kind of just deal with that when it's sort of a free-for-all Q&A kind of thing. Lastly, there is a chat window. We'll all try to kind of keep an eye on it. We might miss your chat, especially if there's a lot of chats. They might scroll by really quickly, but we'll try to keep an eye on it. So the chat window with Windows and Linux, it's Alt-H. With Mac, it's Command-Shift-H, and then you can get to it with your app through the 3 dots as well. A couple of screen snips on this slide here as well. The one on the right is what the phone app looks like. And the one on the bottom is grabbed from a Windows version of Zoom that I think looks the same on Mac. I use Windows, so I'm not 100% certain. So I think that covers sort of the how to use the system. If you got any issues, I think we'll continue to push forward here. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Grant to convene the meeting. So Grant, you ready to go?
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2022 annual meeting of the Specs Users Group. 2022, wow, what a challenging year we've had. Challenging years, actually. 2020, 2021, and now moving into 22. Anyway, I'd like to introduce some folks. Well, first, here's an overall view of our agenda, just the usual stuff. We have a great speaker scheduled, which we'll get to. I would like to introduce our specs area city ECs. We've got Jim Clark from Los Altos. Jim's out there. We've got Neil Caton from Los Altos Hills. E2, I think everybody's here. Leslie from Mountain View. I'm not sure if Jack's out there from Palo Alto. And I saw Leah is there from Stanford. So I did want to have find out from Los Altos how many folks are here from Los Altos. If you could just raise your hand.
Again, it's that Alt-Y or Option-Y feature.
Cool, good. How many from Los Altos Hills? All right. Mountain View. Good, we've got quite a few. I know there's some people besides me from Palo Alto. What we got from Palo Alto? Great, good to see you guys. Stanford, Leah, do we have some people from Stanford?
Don't see anyone else.
Okay, well, great. I want to thank everybody for coming. Let's see, where am I here? God, I get lost too easily. So I think we'll move straight away. Come on, where's my mouse? To election of officers. As you all aware, our current board of directors, myself, we've had a vacant first vice president, and Dave Koberstein has been functioning, as you well know. He's primarily responsible for putting our meeting together today. Our secretary, Leslie Grimm, who does an outstanding job. Neil has been our treasurer for the last couple of years. And Rick, our training officer. And you all know Mark from his past presidentship. And Scott has been the repeater liaison. And to make sure all cities have representation, we've had Steve Olson as the Los Altos rep, Leah Roberts as the Stanford rep, and Jerry Thalls as the Sunnyvale rep. So our that's our current board. Our proposed slate of officers for the board are myself as president. Dave has agreed to move to vice president. We have Steve Ostenberg, who's relatively new to specs, and he's volunteering to run for our second VP. Secretary Leslie Grimm is continuing, and we have Jim Weatherford, who's volunteered to be treasurer for our group. Jim is not new to Mountain View. He's AEC. He's been active there for quite a while. And then, oops. This chat window gets in the way. Training officer Rick Van Mel. Sorry about that. Then for our proposed for the slate for the directors at large, we have Steve Olson, who's agreed to continue as the representative from Los Altos. Neil is going to continue with the board, thankfully, as representative from Los Altos Hills. Leah is continuing as the representative from Stanford. Sunnyvale is currently open. And I forgot to mention it, at my on my EC slide that the EC position in Sunnyvale has been open for a while. And I understand that there's someone under consideration there, but nothing is final there. So this is the complete slate of candidates for the Specs Users Group Board of Directors for this year, this coming year, 2022. I would like to put before the membership the entire slate of, rather than going through individual by individual, propose that we vote on accepting the entire slate as officers and board of directors for 2022. So,
Grant?
yes,
I move that we accept the entire slate by acclamation.
do I hear a second to that?
I'll second that.
Great. Now, I see some raised hands there. Dave Ritchie, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce that last one. Your hand is raised. You have a question or? Okay, it's gone. Okay, so I'm going to do this in reverse voting because it's in the Zoom, it's much easier to keep track of things. So if you are opposed to our slate of candidates, please raise your hands. And Paul and Leah, you need to take your hand down.
Unless, of course, you're opposed.
Paul,
Yes.
you need to take your hand down unless you're opposed to this motion you seconded.
Did that take it down?
No.
Focus should be on your Zoom window when you do Alt-Y.
There we go.
Okay.
So I think we have no hands in opposition to accepting the proposed slate of candidates. And so I would like to welcome the new board. And just by way of a brief announcement, the board will get an email from me about getting our first board meeting together. I was going to try and do it briefly at the end, but it doesn't fit with our Zoom configuration. So anyway, welcome all the new members to the board, and we shall now move on to the fun part of our meeting. And we'll move to our speaker. Our speaker today is Peter Griffith, WA6 DAQ, speaking to us on the history of specs starting at about 1959 and the making of the specs repeater in the years 79 to 2010. So Peter, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to stop my share, and Peter's going to set up his slides here. I hear no audio, so Peter, maybe you're muted still.
How about that?
There we go.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. And it's a pleasure to speak with you all. hopefully we'll give you a little history. I know we got a lot of new hams and new people to specs over the last 20 years or so. Time goes back beyond that, but I'm going to try to give you an overview of the specs history as I know it, and is told to be by Walt Reed, who's our repeater namesake after him. We're still using that, so we'll dive into it here. Let's see if everything works. Whoop, let's see. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, all right. So yeah, what is specs?
Well, back in 1957, when Walt Reed first became active in emergency communications.
I was practicing with some audio. I don't need that. I'm here live. Anyway, Walt Reed, W6ASH, moved to the area in the mid-50s. And according to his own handwriting, there were about 6 active hams in emergency communications in the area. They called themselves the Palo Alto Civil Defense Net. And they all were used 146 megahertz AM radio. There were no such thing as HTs or handy talkies in those days. Most of you either built your own, or they were using what they were called Gonset communicators or Clegg 22ers, all crystal controlled, 5 watts, 2 meters AM. So that's what they were all using. And the Civil Defense Net had, they were meeting one night at Walt's house, and they, at the time, the city of Palo Alto, who had done some remodeling and everything, did not include the hams. So there was some kind of a disagreement going on between the city of Palo Alto and the local hams there. But in 1959, the group that was meeting at Walt's house came up with the name Southern Peninsula Emergency Communications Service. And that name was adopted by the group. Now, at that time, there were no ECs for each city. Walt became the district emergency coordinator for basically the whole South Bay area. Palo Alto, Los Altos, Mountain View, Sunnyvale, even included kind of Cupertino and parts of Santa Clara. And it was just him. It wasn't until later. In the 60s and 70s, the group worked very closely with the Red Cross, and they were involved in with the Red Cross for floods and earthquakes. And on top of that, all types of walkathons, marathons, tennis tournaments, things like that. Now let's see, is my arrow, can you see my arrow on there? So there's, I can't remember the guy sitting down here, but the guy with the bald head here, that's Walt Reed. And this young fellow here in the picture where my arrow is going, and I'm having a senior moment, I can't remember his name, but he's in Palo Alto and he's still active on the SpexNet. In the picture up in the upper right-hand corner, that's Walt Reed there in the center. And this looks like it was a March of Dimes walkathon, something like that. So, but these were back in about 78. So from 1966 until November 1981, Walt acted as the EC or DEC for the 4 cities. However, Specs was growing, and it really became too large of an area for one individual to handle. So they appointed people for several different cities. Jim Lemasny for Palo Alto, Jerry Starkey for Los Altos, Dr. Cy Stein for Mountain View, Ted Harris for Stanford, and Walt Reese for Sunnyvale. Some of you may remember some of these people. Some of you old guys like myself may remember them. Currently, they're all silent keys now. In the 1960s, there was only one repeater that was on Grizzly Peak. And over time, many new members were recruited to join the Monday, it was a Monday night net starting at 8 o'clock on 146 AM. By 1979, there were 130 on the roster with about 80 check-ins each Monday night. In 1979, AM was phasing out and FM became more the standard. And there were a lot of more repeaters that were starting up in the area. So Walt decided that we needed a repeater just for specs. And briefly, what is a repeater? Well, a repeater is a receiver and a transmitter and an antenna, usually placed at a high location to rebroadcast the signal and just make it a little easier to cover the area. We'll go into more details later. So in 1979, Walt made his first repeater. He used one of the first handy talkies. It was called a Tempo S1, and it was about the size of a brick. And that's what we used to call these portable radios, was you carried your brick around. And this was the transmitter, the Yaesu 227. And so he hooked up the two of these in a big metal box in his garage, and he ran coax over his roof. It was about 100 feet to a pine tree that he had. And he had this pine tree, and at the base, he had the one antenna. This had no duplexers. He placed an antenna at the base of the tree. That was the transmitting antenna, and another antenna on the top of this pine tree at his house. And that was the receiving antenna. So I remember seeing that. About this same time, I got to know Walt because I got my license in '75, and through the EMARC, the Electronic Museum Amateur Radio Club. That was the club that met at Foothill College at the Electronic Museum there. And they had put on a class, and Walt and all of these other people that I've mentioned so far were members of that club. That club had only started a couple of years before, and because its sole purpose was to provide volunteers for the museum, and members of PARA and FARS, the old FARS, not the new FARS, and a couple of other clubs in the area, that these were all new members. So, and I'm gonna pause here 1 minute. So I got to know most of the older hams that were in there. Myself and Jim Koski, KT6W, decided to put on a training class for the wives because everybody else in the radio club were engineers, and myself and Jim were the non-engineers. And we decided to put on a class that the average person could understand. And so the first one we did was to put on a class for the wives. So we had Jerry Starkey's wife and Cy Stein's wife, Fred Berry's wife, a couple of other. They're all that's what we did. Our first class was about a dozen women whose husbands had been hams for many, many years. And we got them all to have their licenses. So through that, we got to know these guys pretty well. Now, so in '79, Walt had just put up the repeater in his yard. And this group of us, we were all members of the Electronic Museum Amateur Radio Club, decided to help support Walt and start what we called the repeater board. Okay, Ted Harris was our president. Dave Rickey, I see that he did log in, so he's here today, I believe. He's checked in. Ted Harris is the silent key.
I'm
Dr.
here.
But pardon?
I'm here.
Dave, okay, very good. Yeah, it's Dave Rickey, myself, and Jim Koski are the only ones that are still with us. The rest are silent keys. Dr. Cy Stein was a retired physician, and he had a lot of friends at El Camino Hospital. So he was very instrumental at getting us the spot at El Camino Hospital. I was a very newbie. I'm probably the newest ham on this list. Jerry Starkey was from Los Altos. He became first Fred Berry was the treasurer. Then he died within a year and Jerry Starkey became our treasurer. Bill Robinson was from the Saratoga area, I believe. Anyway, those were the ones that before we started our first repeater board. And each one of those people chipped in a couple of $100 to buy some new equipment. This was the first sanction that we got from the Amateur Radio Council, what's now called NARC, Northern Amateur Relay Council. So that was our very first sanction. So like I said, in 79, let me get back to my notes here. In 79, in October, Walt had installed this repeater in his backyard. And then we pulled together some money and we got some donations from the board. And we put up the first repeater in 1980, in April 1980. We installed the first repeater on the roof of El Camino Hospital. All right, we'll jump as long as we've got this slide here. By March 1983, there were 200 members on the roster. And by 1992, there were 400 members on our roster for specs.
Wow.
In 1984, SVEX was formed. Now, that's the Silicon Valley, similar group to ours, except that they cover the south end of the valley there, Santa Clara and the rest. And Walt was instrumental in getting that group started also. I'm going to jump around here a little bit, or a little out of order, but this is what on the slide here. And in 1985, the SPECS users group was started. What happened is that the board, the repeater board, really didn't want to start another club. We had plenty of clubs in the area, the West Valley Club, the Para Club, the FARS Club. Actually, the FARS Club was dying out by then, and EMARC was the predominant club for Mountain View, Los Altos. But we decided we really didn't need another club. We just wanted to have a repeater that was dedicated for emergency services, open for other things, but our primarily thing was emergency services. The other concern was that there was about this time a repeater group over in the East Bay whose repeater was there. What should I say? There was a takeover, a hostile takeover. A whole bunch of members joined this repeater ham radio club over in the East Bay and gained control since all of their people were on the board. And they basically took over the repeater and used it for a different purpose. It was supposed to be primarily for emergency, and they made it into something else. So a lot of our members and users were skeptical of that. So we didn't want to have a whole lot of people having voting rights on the use of what the repeater could do. And we required anybody that was on our board to work or live within our service area. And this way we kind of controlled that. So about 1985, though, actually, I will go. Let me go back a slide. Yeah. So, oh, sorry. Okay. In 1985, a couple of the ECs, especially I think one of the guys that headed it was Jim Lemazny. He did want to form have some meetings and have more of a membership face to face. And so he was one of the ones that did start the user, what we called it, the users group. Okay. It only lasted a couple of years and then it went inactive because there was just lack of interest. It was resurrected back there in 1998. We appointed a guy by the name of Steve Witt. And he formed what is now the current Specs users group. In April 1986, we got sanctions for 220 and 440 repeaters. Now, this is a video that I'm going to show you. Like I said, we had put up a temporary repeater on El Camino Hospital. And then later, when we got some more funds later that year, we put up another repeater. So this is a video that I took in 1981.
The Specs repeater is located atop El Camino Hospital in Mountain View, California.
Dear ladies, Dave and Rich and I are standing here, been here. We've been here half an hour waiting on you. Where are you?
That voice was Jerry Starkey. And now I'm behind the hospital and we're raising the antenna.
It was a Phelps Dodge antenna.
That's Ted Harris holding the rope. That's Ted Harris.
Well, here we are on top of El Camino Hospital, installing the new station master antenna. It's a beautiful day. A little bit chilly and windy, but very, very clear out. I'll pan around in a minute. Here, this is the old antenna that we've been using, and it will remain as a backup. Is looking north now. Some of the antennas that are already on top of the hospital. We'll take a little panoramic view here. Around the valley, looks like the bridge over there. Extremely windy. Moffett Field, looking northeast.
This was originally recorded on a VHS tape.
In the San Jose. Quite a view from up here.
My goodness, you can still see orchard land.
Now we're looking south. Now towards the southwest and west. There's the crew putting together the antenna and the tower. Well, here's the site of the repeater, the specs repeater, W6ASH/R. Now we're focusing in on the duplexer, which you can see is bolted onto the wall. And we have a safety chain in case of earthquake. Keep from damaging. The repeater is sitting on top of the cabinet here. And it too is strapped into place. We'll get another picture of it here in a minute, but I wanted to give you an overall idea. This is the stairway that's leading up onto the roof. Where we have the antenna mounted, and you can see the coax coming in. Okay, now we're looking at it here. Sitting on top of the cabinet. Inside the cabinet is the old repeater that we used. See the safety chains and the duplexer mounted right above it here. It's very, very noisy in here with all the generators and elevator motors going. Each one of these little lights comes on indicating what's happening. Now we're looking inside at the old repeater. So I still continue to use this as a backup. And at the bottom of the cabinet here, we'll have our emergency power. There's Dave, TJX, WA6TJX, and Chuck, WB6YHS. They're going to be bringing the wire down for the new coax. And here we are, field the specs.
Okay, so that was the video there of that. Now, the let me check my notes here. So it also, so this is in March 1981, we started the flea markets. And this is the flyer that went out. We decided, up until that time, the Para used to put on an auction, I believe. Once a year at the Ampex site, they had like an auction. Nobody had done flea markets before, but I decided to put on as a fundraiser. At that time, I was president of the EMARC club, and we put on a club, a flea market for the club there, and we also put on one for specs. So this is actually the flyer to the very first flea market. It was held in parking lot T, right next door to the museum, where the museum was, at the observatory. So this is now in 1982. There were a few changes because we had a couple of people die, but Jim Lemazny. He was the EC from Palo Alto. And he's the one that kind of really pushed the idea in the beginning for the users group. Like I said, it died out and then was started later on. Dr. Cy Stein, a retired physician, and he's the one that had all the connections at El Camino Hospital and really was instrumental in getting us the permission to use the top of the hospital. Jerry Starkey was from Los Altos. Jim Koski is still with us. I don't know if he's logged on or not. He's currently down in the Palm Springs area. Rick Jocelyn, Silent Key, myself. I'm looking at all these young guys here. Ted Harris, Silent Key, Oliver Barrett. Oliver's with us today. Say hi, Oliver.
Hi, great to see all this old stuff.
Anyway, oh, there's Oliver. Okay, so here's an article that was at the 1982 Los Altos Town Crier. It's actually, you can, in the background is, it was taken up in the hospital. There's our repeater, and Walt and Chuck George, who Chuck George was in the video there along with Dave Rickey. And Chuck worked at the hospital there. He was one of the guys that worked up there in engineering or maintenance or something. I don't know exactly what. So he was instrumental in helping us get everything installed. And this article just is a little bit about specs and the public service that we did. We put up a flyer to hand out to everyone to tell basically what we did. Now you'll notice we changed. When specs was first started, it was called the Southern Peninsula Emergency Communication Service, okay? The repeater board, we adopted the name. I think at that time too, we really didn't know the history of it all, but we adopted the name system because our idea was to essentially have a network of repeaters. We did have plans to put repeaters in other areas. Oliver and Dave were instrumental in building a portable repeater that we could put up, and which, you know, in case of depending on where the emergency was, some of the fires, some of the floods, things like that, they could deploy this portable repeater. But you'll see in the name here, Southern Peninsula Emergency Communication System. So, and this was a flyer that we had printed up, and we handed out to all the various agencies and the public and anybody else that was interested, just telling them who we are and what we do. In the picture over here on the right-hand side, that's Jim Koski. And at that time, HTs were becoming more popular. So, you know, we had many people use their HT if they saw somebody that needed roadside service. Remember, gang, this is the days long before cell phones. And if you saw somebody stranded near the side of the road, you could stop and call in. Yeah, it was, I don't remember the exact time, but we did put on a phone patch later on. In the beginning, we did not have any phone patch. Oh, and by the way, there were no tones. And these early HTs did not have the capability to generate a tone. So it was long before PL tones. And I remember, tell you a little a story aside here. When we first put on our phone patch, I was at my parents' house with a group of people. It was Thanksgiving time. This was over in Saratoga. And I was demonstrating. I said, look at this. I could bring up, and I had my, I think it was a Tempo or Yaesu, but it was the size of a brick, similar to the one that both Walt and Jim are holding in the picture here. And I said, guess what? This is so cool. I can punch up and get a dial tone on the phone. And I gave a little demonstration, and my father turned and looked at me and he said, "So why would you ever want to do that?" And 10 years later, we all had cell phones. Anyway, another little article here, just about specs in the local news. This was 1983, how we were available to help out with the earthquake and what the members did. And the talk here is about in January 1982, how we helped out in the floods. The whole area, the Milpitas area was under floods, things like that. So we were in the news there. All right, by 1984, we were holding the biggest flea markets in the area. They're basically the only ones. But we were holding 2 flea markets a year, and we were so successful that all the other local radio clubs wanted in on the action, because we were making tons of money at Foothill College putting on these flea markets. So here by 1984, and you can see we would hold the first one in March, and the next one went to the Red Cross. The next one went to the museum, the EMARC Club, Electronics Museum Club. In June, the Specs put on another one. In July, the Purim Foundation, which was basically part of the museum too. And then the Palo Alto Para got the funds from the other one. And then the last one was Foothill Amateur Radio Society. So, and then as the years went on, West Valley and other clubs wanted in on the action too, but primarily all of the support from that were at the clubs that were involved near Foothill College. Jump back to 1985, Jim Lemazzi started the Specs Users Group. Like I said, it went inactive after a few years due to lack of interest, but we started up again in about 1998. Here's just a rundown of some of the things that the Specs participated in over the years. Like I said, we've always done the walkathons, the city parades, any kind of fundraisers. Those were what all the Specs members, so you can see there, from the fires, pesticide spraying. I remember that when the helicopters were going over Santa Clara Valley spraying. We did have people that were sent, that volunteered at the Red Cross and went down to, wasn't a local, but like Coalinga, through the Red Cross, and even down to Mexico. In fact, it was during that time period that Ted Harris, who had been a retired executive with Heathkit, became one of the Red Cross. He became very, very active at Red Cross, and he would travel around the country with the Red Cross. So we had a lot of events that we participated in. By 1989, okay, here was our board at that time. Ted Harris was kind of president throughout the whole thing. Oliver was our technical director. George Raven, the secretary, silent key, myself, Walt Reed, Rick Jocelyn, silent key, Bob Mammarella. He became kind of the interim president for the users group. He and Steve Witt were transforming that. Eric Tofstrid helped us out. Eric is now up. I don't know if he's on. I sent him a link. Are you on, Eric? No. Eric lives up in the Sacramento area now, but he's very, very active in ham radio up there. And so that was the board in '89. By the mid 90s, the Specs board, let's see, I can't go back. Yeah, so Ted Harris moved up to the Sonora area. Oliver moved out of the area. George Raven became a silent key. Walt was still alive, but really wasn't active at all. Rick Jocelyn moved out of the area. Eric Topstra moved out of the area. Jim Lemaz became a silent key. So it was basically myself and Bob Mammarella. We were the only ones left. I was currently treasurer at the time because the other two treasurers before me had become silent keys, and the others left, and so I was kind of it. And Bob Mammarella maintained the repeaters, and I became the trustee after Walt died in 2004. For a brief period of time, this was our call sign. After Walt died, we had to petition the FCC to get the call sign back. There we go. So Scott Overstreet joined the group. He had been a member, but he became part of the group that was looking after the equipment in the late 90s, about 2000. I can't remember the exact date, but he and Bob Mammarella watched over the equipment. At that time, we had a remote location. This is taken from the water tank up above Foothills Park in Palo Alto. And we had a remote receiver up there. And this picture of the two of them was taken in the bunker at that site. And then you can see the antennas on top of the water tank. And we had what was called a voter. And a voter, we were going to put at multiple receive sites. We also had made arrangements. One of our members owned a repeater site in the East Bay foothills, and we were making arrangements with him to put up a remote receive site over there also. The transmitter would be on El Camino Hospital, but we thought we would have several remote receive sites. The goal was we wanted our whole service area. You should be able to reach the repeater on a portable HT. That was the whole goal. So in about 2000, we started thinking about a new repeater. And I'll show you more. That was basically Scott designing it, but here is a picture. But we had to move. This is not the site that you saw in the video. We had moved several times because the site that we had under the stairwell was taken over by when cell phone towers came in, the cell company came in and took over that spot. So we had to move, and we had changed equipment several times, but this was our equipment in the late 90s, which Bob Mammarella basically maintained. So in looking at this and planning for the future, Scott came up with the new idea. And so this is what we ended up with by 2006. Well, it took a lot of planning. There's the 3 repeaters, 2 meters, 220, 440. Then we had we had a very elaborate voter. And the interesting thing is we've never used it, because when we put up the new repeater, we discovered that without these remote sites, we still had great reception. So a combination of new repeater, more sensitive, better placement of our antennas, that we did not need the voter. But Scott spent a lot of time designing that. So here we are building, and I don't know how, I hope, let's go back here. So we had a lot of building going on. There's Scott really was the designer of the whole thing, and myself, I was just the soldering. Scott would tell me what to do, and Dave primarily worked on software and everything designed for. Oh, yes, Dave came on board early 2000s. I don't remember exactly. I met Dave at one of the EMARC meetings. Actually, EMARC was just changing its name to FARS. because they had not been meeting at the museum for a couple of years. So they decided to use the FARS name. And I met Dave there and coaxed him into helping us out there. Good asset there. But there we are building the repeater. And here's what some of the radios look like. Looking inside at the various components and all the cabling that puts it all together. There's Scott showing part of it. He had this great idea of how we were going to be able to, in case of emergency, if one a repeater, we should be able to plug and play a new one in its place. Everything had to be replaceable. So it was very, very elaborate. Is very elaborate, I should say. So we went through a lot of testing and programming. This is up at Scott's house up in Los Altos Hills. Just working on the repeater up there. And finally, the day comes that we're going to install it. So we gathered a group of people. We had to bring this thing up through the elevators at El Camino Hospital. And then to get it on the roof, we had to carry it up the stairways. In the upper left-hand corner, there's Dave Platt, and the bottom one, Dave Platt. The other picture here, Jim Clark. There's the gang. There we are on top of El Camino Hospital, carrying up all of the parts there. Myself, Scott, Dave, Jim Clark, Phil Hawkins, and somebody helped me out, our poor Jerry Silent Key from Mountain View. Jerry Haig, yes, sorry. So we carried all the equipment up to the top of the hospital. And of course, we get up there, here's the repeater case, all the various parts of equipment, and now the job to put it all together. So this is basically, again, kind of what the repeater looks like, or one of them, because we have actually 3 repeaters, but each one, we've got an antenna, the feed line that comes down to the duplexers that split out to the receivers. And we have a controller that controls the whole thing. And so the current repeater system is actually 3 repeaters. And they're all can be linked together. Prior, like I said, the early repeaters did not have tone control or anything. The first thing that it did, we were able, when we did the phone patch, and then people were having to modify their HTs to put on PL so they could control it. Nothing like our new system now. Dave makes a comment. Go ahead, Dave.
Actually, the first repeater that the 3rd generation repeater we put in 1981 had auto patch. Actually, it was auto dial, so that a user could just punch in a code for a particular agency.
That's right. So just to review again, a repeater has many parts. You got your receiver, your transmitter, the duplexer, which divides the signal. The antenna, we had filters, controllers, hardline coax, phone patch, remote receiver, the voter. Those are just some of the parts. Here's a picture of on the left side, the new duplexer. You can actually see 2 of the duplexers. The one on the bottom is for 2 meters. The next one up is 220. 440 is much smaller. Here's the old set of duplexers that we have. This round thing mounted here, that was the duplexer for 440 at the time in the old setting there. And you can see a difference from when I took that video on how many antennas now are on top of El Camino Hospital. the cell phone antennas. We actually had the tower does belong to Specs. That's all of ours. Down on the bottom right-hand corner, here where I'm moving my arrow. This actually is a beam that is pointed directly at the Foothills water tank. And this was the beam that we were going to use, and we did for a short time. It linked the hospital on a 240 megahertz, 220, no, sorry, 420 megahertz. 420 megahertz, it linked the hospital to the water tank. By the way, up there on the water tank, I believe, and Dave or Oliver might refresh my memory, I think at one time, didn't we also have a packet repeater up there? Anyway.
I don't think there was I don't know about a packet machine, but I do know that we had the old 220 repeater, 224.36 operated from the water tank at one time.
Yeah. And I believe this other picture on top of the tower is Scott hanging on up at the top of the tower there. Anyway, some of the filters that are used to block out interference, and now because we had so many other radios, police, fire, so the amateur radios were on El Camino Hospital before any of the public service agencies. The only thing that was up there when we went up there was a paging system that was used by El Camino Hospital. I kind of explained before what the voter did. This was the cage. In case we have any remote receivers from around the area, this was the plan. As it turned out, everything worked so well. We're not using the voter right now, but it's all capable. Here's the controller that makes everything work together. Software, that's the key to making it all work. PL tones, I won't get into that. We all know what that is now. Why is it used? What the controller does? Unless somebody wants to make a comment on that. So we're able to turn the repeaters on and off, have different modes, set the clocks and timers. Everything has to be operated remotely, either through radio or we can call up on the telephone and coordinate it all, make different recordings, make announcements, test your signal, turn on the auto patch to make calls, auto dial, things like that. All the capabilities. So that's kind of the end of it, gang. Dave and Scott are keeping it running now. And what's happening in the future? Well, things have been in limbo for about the last 6 years. And because we did have interference problem, as most of you know, and currently the 2-meter repeater is being run at a backup site at a private home up in Los Altos Hills, because we are experiencing so much interference at the hospital site. And after many hours of searching and thinking at first it was the cell phone people and who knows what, jammers, whatever, we just have never been able to really determine the cause of the interference. So temporarily we have the 2-meter repeater is running it remotely. The other two are running at the hospital. We also have a backup site up at Maryknoll, up in the Cupertino foothills, that is capable of being used if we need to up there. But Dave, I know in a little later on his report, will tell us all what the current status is and when we might hope to move to the new part of the hospital, because El Camino Hospital plans on tearing down this old building as soon as they get everything complete. So with that,
I can add a couple things.
Yeah,
Early on, that microcontrol specialties repeater, I believe, is the one that was later relocated to the house of Ross Forbes. Old call sign WB6GFJ, and I think his new call sign is K6GFJ, and that served in backup service for quite a long time. Ross Forbes is still around, but moved out of the area. So I presume that is that the same microcontrol specialties machine that's now up at Mary Knoll, I understand?
Actually, we bought a couple of new Yaesu repeaters that are programmable, and they were kind of on a special sale. They were these fusion repeaters, but they could also be used. And we have a couple of those, and we're using those. Maybe Scott or Dave, I don't know what. When Ross Perot moved out of the area, we took the backup equipment out of his place up there before he moved. So Dave, go ahead. Dave can maybe fill us in there.
I was just going to comment that I still have a box full of documentation on the MCS controller, which I was about to dump, assuming that thing had long passed into the antiquity. Is it still in use?
We'll have to ask Dave, or Scott would probably be the best one to know that. Scott, is that, do we want to save the documentation on that?
Dave here. I think it would be worth saving it for historical reasons, but no, that repeater is not in active or backup use in any of our systems.
Okay, I'll talk to you guys offline about what to do with the documents I have.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we have digitized all of our documents and materials for the repeater, and have those online. So that might be of historical interest there, Dave. Or get in touch with Dave Platt. He can take care of that. Anyway, thank you all. Any other questions right now, or we'll turn it back to our president? All right, thanks again.
A question?
Yeah, go ahead, question. Is it Terry, I think?
Yes. I was wondering, do you have any information on the use of the repeaters for emergency service during the Loma Prieta earthquake?
Yes. You know, Eric Topstred, who is not on right now, made a recording of several things when the repeater was in use. He actually recorded quite a bit of that, and that's available. I'm not sure whether if Leslie has that information. She may have that on the website. She may have that recording. Leslie, do you recall? Did you get that recording about the earthquake? Anyway, I don't hear her there, but there's a possibility. I'm trying to remember whether that is on the Specs website, the recording.
This is Steve. I was going over the Specs website the other day. There's actually a set of 4 different audio clips that are large segments of what was recorded off of the Loma Prieta earthquake.
Oh, good.
Yeah, and I have downloaded copies of those if they're not on the website.
Any other questions or comments? All righty, I'll turn it back to you there.
Okay, thank you very much, Peter. This was really a very interesting presentation. It's always nice to go back and look at our roots and you know, see how it all began. So I think right now we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back to the business meeting part of our meeting. And so with that, we're going to go to
The donuts.
come on. Here we go. There you go. All right. Enjoy. I'll see. Be back here.
10:20.
10:20.
All right.
10:20. Good.
I think it's reasonable to use this for chat as well. Obviously, it's like a repeater, so only one person can talk. But you know, I think it's open session right now for the next 10 minutes.
So Dave Wiki, are you still on? It's Oliver.
So this is Terry again. I was asking about the Loma Prieta because my uncle Clarence Bush, W6 GCM from Yuba City, was on his HF radio for about the next 24 hours plus after Loma Prieta hit. And he eventually received an award from one of the Bay Area agencies for all the help he did in communications. So I thought that was very interesting. Also, my daughter was 3 months old.
Leslie, I don't know if you saw Drew Anderson's chat. Attending with me is Bob Anderson. So we have Drew and Bob on one line there. So I'm not sure if that'll come through in the attendee list, but something to make a note of when we're reconciling later.
Thank you. And I know Steph and Norm, and then Scott and Barbara, right?
I see Dave and Kathy listed on one channel.
Okay, that's Mountain View. That gets us up to 18.
Let's see.
I'm just counting those for my own purposes.
Did you say Jeff and Kelly already? I see a Jeff and Kelly.
Okay, that gets us to 19.
Thomas and Emma ... his wife, I guess, Thomas, is in Sunnyvale. Amanda.
Okay, good. You'll get the
Okay.
actual list to me, right?
Yep. Yeah, Rick and I will send you what we got. Go ahead, Grant.
I think it's time to get on with our business meeting. Is there anything else you guys need to cover before we move on? Not hearing anything. So on with our business meeting. First order of business is approval of the minutes from 2020 of the annual meeting from 2021. Leslie, do you have anything you want to say about those? They have been posted on the website for the past year, so I'm assuming everybody that needed to read them has. And I will entertain a motion to accept the approval of the minutes.
I will move to accept the minutes of the prior meeting. This is KI6PUR Rick.
Do we have a
And
second?
Neil seconds.
All right. Again, we'll be doing negative voting. Is there anyone that is opposed to accepting those minutes?
Remember, you use the Alt-Y or Command-Y on your keyboard.
Okay. Nothing seen, nothing heard. The minutes have been approved for 2021. Okay. Now we'll move on to the treasurer's report. Neil has a few things to point out. So Neil, take it away, please. Neil.
Sorry about that. I was just
There you-
entering the person who just submitted his payment. So I can get
awesome.
numbers.
Awesome.
So the numbers on this slide are, 4 days out of date. We currently have 76 paid members, 14 new members, 53 people who haven't renewed, who were on the roster in the last couple of years. Our financial position is basically unchanged. We typically have about $400 of income and $600 of expenses. And that's been true for the last few years when we haven't had a flea market. Ending cash balance is still right around 37K. And that's pretty much it. It's a very quiet year as far as treasurer is concerned.
So not much change from last year. That's
correct.
That's all right. Does anyone have any questions to Neil about the treasurer's report?
Move to accept Paul KJ6AMM.
Do I hear a second?
Second, Kilo Golf 6 Tango Mike India.
Thank you. Do we have any opposition to accepting the treasurer's report for the calendar year 2021? Again, it's negative voting only if you disagree with accepting. I see no hands. So the treasurer's report has been accepted by the group. We will move then to education and training. Rick, do you have a few words to say about what happened or what's happening?
Thank you, Grant. Yes, I do. Our training activities support the SPEC's objectives to maintain a crew of amateur radio operators ready to provide emergency communication services in a time of need. We are extremely fortunate that Santa Clara County has an excellent structure and training program that provides a spectrum of courses from beginner to expert in amateur radio emergency communications. Rather than trying to duplicate that effort, our focus is to remind our members of both training opportunities and city, county, and public service events where we can practice what we have learned. This is primarily accomplished with announcements on the Monday Night Net and in newsletters to our members. If anyone has suggestions for additional training activities, please let me know. Short and sweet, this is KI6PUR, Rick.
I might add to that, that the Monday night nets that we run are really focused on training people to be ready to activate and communicate in case of emergency. So with that, we'll move on. I'm gonna let Dave Platt, AE6 CEO, tell us what's in store for the repeaters. Go ahead, Dave.
Okay, so the repeaters status, as in previous years, the last few years, has been static and stable with no real changes in the last year. We continue to be ready to move the repeater system to the new Sobrato Pavilion penthouse when the hospital is ready for us. And as in several previous years, we'd thought that that would have happened by now, but it has not for a variety of reasons. For most of this last year, the delay on the hospital side has been twofold. We're all still dealing with COVID and access restrictions and so forth. In addition, as in the current old tower, we will be sharing roof space with Verizon and their cell phone installation. They'll be moving to a new facility in the new tower, and that installation has been badly delayed, apparently by equipment shortages. So we were asked to hold off on our move until their system had been installed and all the space allocation and equipment install was done. That was supposed to take a few months. It's taken 18 months and they're not done yet. So I've remained in contact with the facilities people at the hospital, and last communication I had earlier this month was that possibly in the next month or so, we could go over and meet with them and get another phase of the move planning underway and start getting the hospital approvals for the antenna installs that we will need. We do expect to be able to move all of the equipment from the old tower before the old tower is demolished. The hospital has not yet scheduled demo of the old tower. They're waiting until they get city approvals for the new facilities that they plan to install in the location where the old tower is now. They want to do that before they begin deconstructing the old building. So we're not at risk of having to go over there on 10 minutes notice and tear the repeater out and move it to the new building on very short alert. But we do want to get the move underway, and so Scott and I and the others in the Repeater Association will be working with the hospital to make final decision about the antenna installations and the location of the cabinet in the new building. And when the time comes for us to do a move, as with the install that you saw Peter talk about, we will put out a call for help for additional hands to help us move the equipment and get things set up. And we'll let you know when we know. The repeater operation has been the same this year as it has last year, with 2 meters operating off-site to mitigate the interference issue, 220 and 440, and the linking system operating from the El Camino Old Tower. The linked resource net has been used a number of times for training events and other events, and that's available pretty much on request if anybody needs to do a county-wide activation. So no real changes, no new problems, and we will just continue on and do the move when we can. And that's all I have for now, unless anybody has questions.
All right, thank you, Dave. Are there any questions? We have any hands? Okay. Dave, you are planning to do your briefing at the close of our meeting?
That is correct. For anybody who hasn't been through it or would like to have a repeat session, I will discuss the repeater setup, command and control capabilities, and I have the document that I normally hand out on paper I can make available as a PDF. So at the end of the business section, I will do that.
Okay, great, good. So thank you again for that update. And now I'm going to turn it over to Patrick Muffler to give us a report on the Monday night UHF 220 net. So take it away, Patrick.
Can you bring up my slide?
Oh, sorry, I forgot to click. Yes, there you go.
Thank you. Most of my report is on this slide right there. The UHF 220 net, as you know, meets from 1930 to 2000 every Monday night on both 44800 and 224.140. We had a total of 2,805 check-ins on the 52 nights of 2021. That averages 54 per night. The highest number of check-ins was 65 and the lowest was 41. I note on here that we had 77 hams checked in more than 12 times, 43 hams checked in more than 35 times, 23 hams checked in more than 45 times, and 3 hams checked in 51 out of 52 possible times. That'd be Mike Kuttner, Paul Hansen, and Leslie Grimm. Incidentally, all from Mountain View. These data that I'm presenting come from the information that is supplied to me and Leslie by the net controls. We take this, I put it in an overall spreadsheet, keep track of it, and each month I prepare a list of frequent callers listed alphabetically by suffix. I add any hams that have checked in for the first time in the previous month, and I delete those hams that have not checked in for the previous 4 months. Leslie Grimm then finds my mistakes. After correcting them, she posts the resultant frequent caller list on the Specs Users Group website. When any of you do net control for the UHF 220 net, you'll find it best to use the current version from the website, not just some old version that happens to be in your files and is pretty much out of date. I would like to thank everybody who participated in the UHF 220 net in 2021, and special thanks to those of you that served as net controls. It is indeed a busy net. Thank you.
And thank you, Patrick, for that update. And it is a good net. So now I'm going to, oh, I see that Leslie raised her hand. Go ahead, Leslie.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to all the people that have done net control and followed the instructions that came out earlier in the year on the net script, where we asked people to acknowledge the caller with their call sign and their name. And for the most part, everybody's been doing that and has followed the instructions on the, on the script for how to acknowledge people, how to make the announcements. And people have been really good about turning in the report by the next morning. So just a thank you to all the people that have been net control for that net for the past year.
Thank you, Leslie. Do any of you folks out there have any comments they would like to make? It's open to things that you would like to, for the board to move on in this coming year. It ranges from that to just comment about anything. Just have to raise your hand and something will happen. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our business meeting.
Grant, Stiv had his hand up.
I missed that. Stiv, go ahead.
Well, I just had a question. One of the gentlemen who attended the CERT meeting over for the Montaloma CERT had talked about the mesh network, the Bay Area mesh network. And I was just curious if that was something that Specs would be interested in, or whether that was something that doesn't belong under our jurisdiction.
Yeah. Does anybody have anything they want to say about that besides me? And I don't have much to say about it. I'm aware of the mesh network, but that's about all I can say that I know about it. Dave, Neil, go ahead.
So I'm also aware of the Bay Area Mesh Network. It doesn't reach very far down into our valley. We chatted about it at the county level, and because it's unencrypted, it wasn't really meeting the needs for data for most of our partner agencies. But there is a county-driven Part 15 network that is up and running on all 4 of the county-operated repeater sites that any jurisdiction is welcome to connect up to. And that is all documented on the sec-ares-races.org website.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before we move on? Well, with that, I will officially close the Specs Users Group annual meeting for January 2022. And I want to thank you all for your attention and participation in the meeting. And with that, you're free to do whatever. And just reminder that Dave Platt is going to present his repeater stuff. So with that, thank you all and have a great year.
Just a quick question. I know the meeting's closed. Drew Anderson, I think you've been trying to raise your hand. The meeting's closed, but did you want to ask something?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I was just going to suggest sometimes we run into a lot of new hams, and some of us who have wandered off and could use a refresher. And although Monday Night Net does provide a good practice regime, I'm wondering if we could set up something that'd be sort of like a helpline or a help session if people have issues they're having, either technical, like a repeater that's gone south, or some technical way of approaching of dealing with messaging. It's just a suggestion. Maybe one specs meeting a month could be an extra half hour if there's just sort of help questions, something like that. That's what I suggest. Thank you so much. Great meeting. Thanks. Appreciated everybody's presentations. Very good.
Thanks, Drew. I think we'd had some brief discussion about doing that, and I kind of dropped the ball on that. I was going to mention it to Rick, and I see his hand is raised. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, thank you, Grant. And Drew, to your point, of course, the county has an excellent introduction to fundamentals of communication, the 2-part series. I think to your point, new hams may not become new hams exactly when that course is being scheduled. So working with Leslie and Mountain View, we have essentially a Jumpstart 101 PowerPoint show that covers the things like how do you use a repeater, how do you do the Monday Night Nets, what frequencies are on where. We can certainly make that available and post it on the Specs Net and direct people to it. We clearly say right in the beginning, this is not a substitute or a competition for the excellent program put on by the county, but it certainly helps somebody get started if the county class is several months away. So we can discuss that and do that if you think that would help.
If you can still hear me, yeah, I appreciate that. Those things are available. I'm talking more like, you know, a troubleshooting type of session, you know, where either it's one meeting, one of your specs meetings, or, you know, maybe something where if somebody's just having an issue, not necessarily a new ham, but they're having some kind of either a technical issue or a procedural issue. So, you know, just sort of like, you know, 1-800 call mom, you know, that kind of a thing.
Good thought. We'll see how we can perhaps implement something like that. For the packet group, there's the packet web group, so that you get emails that flop around, and that works very well for that. It would be similar to something like that we could do as well.
Yeah. Steve, I see your hand is raised.
Okay, yeah. With regards to what Drew was saying, I agree. That was one of the things I had been thinking about as well. I will say the reason I'm here at all is because when Gina and I first got our ham radio license, started looking, is we got in touch with Leslie, and she actually came over and helped us get started. If we hadn't had her help, we probably would have gotten our radios. We would have talked a couple of times. We would have been overwhelmed by all the stuff that was on the web and having no clue where to start. And I wouldn't be here today. So, you know, I learned about Elmer's and all this other stuff. It might be worthwhile that if we had people who are willing to volunteer or reach out to new hams to kind of walk them through where are the classes they can go, where can they get equipment. One of the big questions I always had is, okay, I've got money, what do I buy? And everybody always go, well, there's, you know, your choice of radio is really whatever you want, but it might be, you know, for new people coming in, maybe have 2 kits already predefined, said, here's a Yaesu, here's about, you know, here's the Yaesu defined for this, it's an entry, you know, a mid-level product, and here's the Baofeng cheap product, and here's how you get started. So it just gives people nice, clear steps where they can go, what they can buy, and what they can do to get involved.
Sounds good, Steve. I see Thomas, you have your, Thomas Liebold has your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, regarding helping members that have technical issues, one thing that we have done on the CityNet is if that issue was raised up under other business during the CityNet on Monday, we'd tell those members to stay after the closing of the official net and talk through those issues or schedule a time to handle those. Of course, that assumes that the issue isn't one that prevents that member from joining the net in the first place and talking to net control.
Thank you, Thomas. Patrick.
I would like to just reiterate what Steve said, that there is a role for this sort of availability of training, which is not given really in the introductory county courses, as good as they are. The questions of, you know, well, you get yourself any radio, whatever you want, that's pretty bewildering to somebody that doesn't come into this with a PhD in electronic engineering. Some of us that came in from other specialties, that was, and I was very fortunate in Palo Alto in having someone that did indeed guide me through this and help me get started with a lot of things. Just reiterating what Steve said.
Thank you, Patrick. You can put your hand down too.
Oh, thank you.
All right. I'm going to stop sharing this meeting closed sign. And I mean, the meeting is officially closed. We're entertaining ideas, comments. So Leslie. your
Yeah,
hand-
we were gonna have a board meeting after the meeting. How do we do that, or are we doing that?
I was going to do that, but Dave wants to do his, well, let me just say that I wanted the board to get together to try and come up with a date for our next board meeting, basically. But we can do that offline rather than tie up the rest of this, this group who might want to hear Dave's spiel on the repeater operation, which is, if you haven't been through it and don't have the poop sheets, is well worth the time and interaction with Dave on that. So I'm going to send out an email to the board basically, and we'll take care of that that way.
Okay, thank you.
You can take your hand down. Good. So anyone else out there have anything they want to bring up, talk about? Nothing heard, so I'm going to turn it over to Dave, and you can proceed as you like, Dave.
Dave, a logistical question for you. We're still recording. I don't know if this section, since you kind of intend it for members, maybe I should pause the recording, or do you want it to be recorded?
Yeah, maybe pause since it's not part of the meeting per se. I'm going to